Hi everyone, my name is Negin. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the University of British Columbia. Today, I would like to present about the effects of the Arrowsmith Intensive Symbol Relations Training on cognitive functioning. This research was conducted with the collaboration of Dr. Laura Boyd at the University of British Columbia and Dr. Gregory Rose at Southern Illinois University School of Medicine. Neurodevelopmental disorders are normative differences in brain growth and functioning that can affect multiple domains. Neurodevelopmental disorders typically manifest in early childhood and are characterized by lifelong impairments in personal, social, academic, or occupational functioning. Students with neurodevelopmental disorders, for example, specific learning disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and autism spectrum disorder, often have cognitive difficulties compared to their typically developing peers, which contribute to their impairments in overall functioning. Today, designing effective interventions to enhance cognition in individuals with neurodevelopmental disorders has been challenging. A considerable amount of research has been conducted to develop an understanding of the cognitive correlates of neurodevelopmental disorders. Executive functions are commonly identified as deficits across neurodevelopmental disorders. Executive functions are a set of cognitive processes largely supported by the prefrontal cortex that are necessary for the cognitive control of behavior. Three core interrelated executive function skills like inhibitory control, working memory, and cognitive flexibility give rise to higher order skills such as reasoning, problem solving, and planning. Across neurodevelopmental disorders, research has demonstrated that executive functions broadly tend to be less well developed than they are in the typically developing populations. While challenges with executive functions are common across neurodevelopmental disorders, research has focused on defining the cognitive profiles of specific neurodevelopmental disorders. For example, children with specific learning disorders tend to deficiencies in working memory and processing speeds. Other studies have associated SLD with difficulties in temporal processing and attention. These specific cognitive skills have been identified as having influence over certain academic skills. For example, challenges with fluid reasoning are associated with SLD in essay writing and math skills. The cognitive profile that has emerged for those with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder has some similarities to that of SLD. Children with ADHD have a similar pattern of executive function deficits, like problems with inhibition, cognitive flexibility, short-term memory, and verbal working memory, but these are more significant than is seen in SLD. Another neurodevelopmental disorder that has a well-studied cognitive profile is autism spectrum disorder. Some of the established challenges in ASD, including executive dysfunctions regarding attention, planning, and set shifting, have been reported in these groups of children. With the growing understanding of cognitive challenges, researchers are increasingly examining whether cognitive training platforms can improve functioning in students with neurodevelopmental disorders or not. A meta-analysis of 13 studies evaluated cognitive interventions in neurodevelopmental disorders populations and found significant gains in all intervention targets aside from inhibitory control. Large effect sizes were seen for attention, working memory, long-term memory tasks, and a small effect size for academic achievement and behavior rating scales. In addition to cognitive interventions for neurodevelopmental populations, there is growing general interest in the potential utility of executive function training. Among the many cognitive and executive function interventions being studied today is the Arrowsmith program. The Arrowsmith program is centered on the hypothesis that weak cognitive capacities can be strengthened by practicing specific tasks. Importantly, the program is highly personalized to each child. Participation in the complete program involves receiving an intervention plan comprised of multiple cognitive exercises, each focusing on different processes based upon an individual evaluation of each participant. In an initial evaluation of this program with children who had or were likely to have SLD, both cognitive and academic growth were evaluated. Significant improvements in learning, long-term memory, verbal fluency, inductive reasoning, processing speed, and attention were seen after 1 year participation in this program. Additionally, significant improvements were seen for overall academic skills and specifically for single word reading, reading fluency, math fluency, and spelling. These results indicate that the Arrowsmith program may be an effective cognitive intervention for some individuals in the SLD population. The goal of the current study is to examine the impact of intensive training in one of the Arrowsmith exercises, which is the symbol relations task. Symbol relations training is the sole focus of individuals who enroll in the Arrowsmith Cognitive Intensive Program or CIP. Symbol relations is a critical part of higher order reasoning and is responsible for processing concepts across all academic disciplines. We hypothesize that intensive practice of the symbol relations task would lead to increased cognitive functioning in students with neurodevelopmental disorders. A total of 27 students, 18 males and 9 females, ages 9.4 to 18.4 years with neurodevelopmental disorders were recruited from a larger group of CIP participants at the Arrowsmith schools in Toronto, Canada, and Eton Arrowsmith schools in Vancouver, Canada, and Redmond, United States. Recruitment took place through flyers posted at the Arrowsmith schools. Data collections complied with ethical research principles and procedures by the Declaration of Helsinki. In their initial assessments, a battery of standardized neuropsychological tests and the symbol relations rating scale were completed over one appointment. Following their initial assessment, students participated in the cognitive intensive program for 6 weeks. Post-training was performed over one appointment immediately after the participants completed their training sessions. Cognitive functioning was assessed using the Woodcock-Johnson Test of Cognitive Abilities 4th edition. Woodcock-Johnson is a battery designed to measure broad and narrow cognitive abilities as articulated by contemporary CHC theory. For the purpose of this study, measures of broad and narrow CHC abilities were generated from components of the Woodcock-Johnson standard and extended batteries. Broad abilities measured included comprehension knowledge, fluid reasoning, short-term working memory, cognitive processing speed, and long-term retrieval. Narrow abilities measured included number facility, perceptual speed, and cognitive efficiency. The Woodcock-Johnson provides transformation of raw scores data into test-specific W scores that allow for tracking of students' growth over time, as well as standard scores for normative comparisons. Participants also completed the symbol relations rating scale, and they were assigned a level of proficiency at baseline and at the end of intervention based upon an assessment of their accuracy for the different levels of the task. The Arrowsmith symbol relation task is a computer-based exercise consisting of a sustained visual spatial processing task of progressively increasing difficulty. This task requires students to use relational reasoning to conceptually and automatically process the relationships between an increasingly number of hands and an analog clock face, which you can see in this picture. The clock face initially showing only one hand. Participants used a keyboard to enter a value for the hour shown. Feedback on the computer screen indicated whether the response is correct or incorrect. If the response was incorrect, the participants continued to respond until the correct answer was entered. After this, a new clock face was shown. Once a participant reached a criterion of 90% accuracy over a series of consecutive responses, an additional hand was added to the clock face. This process continued until up to 10 hands had been added to the clock. Participants worked for 30 to 40 minutes per session on the task, up to 5 hours per day, 5 days per week for 6 weeks. These graphs show the results of Woodcock-Johnson cognitive mean standardized scores at pre-test and post-test. The results show that there was a positive increase in all measures of cognitive performance between pre-test and post-test. The average symbol relations score at pre-test and post-test is depicted in the left graph, which shows an improvement. A paired sample t-test analysis was conducted on W scores to evaluate the effectiveness of symbol relations training on all cognitive measures. Our analysis revealed that the training resulted in statistically significant improvement in all areas evaluated except for short-term working memory and number facility. As might be expected, a paired sample t-test indicated that intensive training resulted in significant improvement in the symbol relations task. This exploratory study examined the effects of a relatively brief but intense training in the Arrowsmith symbol relations task on cognitive functions. Our results indicated statistically significant effects of symbol relations training on a variety of cognitive functions in students with neurodevelopmental disorders. Additional studies will be needed to replicate our initial results, measure their stability, and examine for possible far transfer of practice effects on the neuropsychological assessments. This will enable us to isolate and specify the underlying cognitive mechanisms involved and facilitate the translation of our findings into practice. The findings of this study should be evaluated in light of some potential limitations, most importantly, the limited sample size and the absence of an untrained control group. We plan to address these limitations by continuing this research to add subjects and expand the range of ages examined to assess the effects of training in typically developing control groups and to examine the consequences of repeated neuropsychological testing in both neurodevelopmental disorders and typically developing groups that do not receive symbol relations training. We also plan to examine increasing the time between assessments both to further guard against practice effects on the neuropsychological test and to determine whether the effects of symbol relations training that we observed are long-lasting. In this vein, we will also include the follow-up sessions to examine the etiological involved in the development and the stability of the outcomes of this study. Last but not least, I would like to say thank you to the private donors of this project. This research was funded by private donations to the Dr. Boyd Brain Behavior Lab at the University of British Columbia and Dr. Roy's Neuroscience Research Center at Southern Illinois University. Thank you for your attention.